one.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 91st episode of the Atlas Society Asks. My name is Jennifer Anju Grossman. My friends call me Jag. I'm the CEO of the Atlas Society. We are the leading organization introducing young people to the ideas of Ayn Rand in fun, creative ways like graphic novels and animated videos. Today, we are joined by Robby Soave. Before I even begin to introduce our guest, I wanted to remind all of you who are watching us on Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, please use the comment section and type in your questions. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. So Robby Soave is a journalist and senior editor for Reason magazine, named by Forbes in their 2016 30 Under 30 list in the category of law and policy. Soave won widespread recognition for challenging media malpractice, first during the 2014 debunking of the Rolling Stone hoax article about sexual assault at the University of Virginia, and then again in 2019, countering the defamation of Covington Catholic students at the Lincoln Memorial incident. We're going to cover those. He's also the author of 2 books, Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump, and Tech Panic, Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future. Robby, welcome again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to talk with you.
So the subtitle of your book is Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future. Last week, Facebook stock fell 26%, erasing more than 230 billion in value. What do you make of that? And is that maybe one more reason why we shouldn't fear Facebook?
No, it absolutely is. Part of my pitch for not being so afraid of Facebook that we need to stick the government on them, a policy outcome that is now something both Republicans and Democrats have become increasingly interested in, and something I'm warning against. One of the reasons not to bother is I don't buy that they are in this impossible to dislodge, undefeatable position of monopoly dominance. And this is evidence, I think, that that's true. You know, when I look at Facebook, I see actually a humbled, a humiliated, a weakened company that is not as popular as it once was. It is struggling to attract the users it wants. It wants young users. That's what advertisers care about. That's what its own analytics care about. It cares about the younger demographic. But young people, you know, I have moved on. I'm not counting myself. I'm in a middle tier of age cohort now. And even I find, you know, Facebook to be a little, to be outdated or to be something mostly older Americans use, which is perfectly fine for them. It's not what Facebook wants. The kids are into even Instagram, which is owned by Facebook. So it's giving them a little bit of a staying power. You know, the new thing is was Snapchat, and then it's TikTok. TikTok has surpassed Google as the main social media site, which is, you know, worrisome for other reasons because it's not an American company. But if the fear is Facebook, I think that fear is proving to be not so real. It's not the case that the government needs to destroy this company. It's doing a perfectly good job of kind of discrediting itself on its own.
So one of the issues you cover in the book, you acknowledge kind of anti-conservative bias of social media companies. I mean, part of which I think is driving users to other platforms like Rumble and Gab and Parler. And, you know, so you provide some examples of that, the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story on Google and on Twitter being one of the most egregious examples. But you argue that on balance, social media has been a widely positive thing for voices on the right. How so? And maybe give some examples.
Absolutely. So I certainly acknowledge that there have been individual content moderation decisions on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, et cetera, that have been that I think were unfair and that were unfriendly to conservative or libertarian or non-liberal speech. Actually, it happens to leftists too. You know, people who fall outside the kind of mainstream media liberal consensus. have been at risk of being silenced on these platforms. And I have denounced it when it happens. I think a lot of it was bad. The Hunter Biden example being this kind of quintessential example of a absolutely a call they got wrong. One they admit they got wrong, by the way. They've actually apologized and said, yes, we got that wrong. But on the whole, on the whole effect, considering the whole effect of social media, I don't think you would say that social media has been bad for conservatives. On the contrary, I think you would say social media has been good for non-liberal speech. There are, specific things you can point to. If you look, the top 10 articles being shared, news articles on Facebook at any given day, more often than not, they are from conservative news outlets. Dan Bongino and Ben Shapiro do particularly well. Tucker Carlson, Breitbart, the Daily Caller, the Daily Wire. There are days where like 8 of the top 10 or 9 of the top 10 or 10 of the top 10 are all these articles. So you can't, you can certainly argue, and I would agree that there are individual cases where conservatives have been silenced. But overall, the social media environment has broken the gatekeeping, the guardrails of the mainstream media. They have allowed dissenters, provocative speech, contrarians to voice their views. And yes, sometimes Facebook and the other sites come down on them in a heavy-handed way and they silence them, and I'm against that. But let's not, throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Any campaign, any political effort to break up Facebook or to break up Twitter is aimed at the very platforms that are giving voices to different views all of the time. Do you want to go back to an era where, it's just a couple news channels, just a couple newspapers? The conversations that we're having on social media was not possible 10, 20, 50 years ago. The mainstream media is the most in favor of breaking up social media of all, as are Democratic politicians. That should give us pause. If these people want to destroy these companies because they think there's too much free speech happening, that should tell us something. We should listen to them. We should be warned by the fact that they want to do that, and we should think twice.
So some of the conservative concerns we've talked about, and tell us about kind of the push from the left. Is it that conservatives are wildly popular on social media and Facebook, or is there something else going on?
Well, I mean, people in the kind of progressive liberal sphere, many of them, I think, understand that social media on net has been good for their enemies, has been good for us, and they want to do something about it. They attribute, and I think this is wrong, but they attribute, Donald Trump's victory in 2016 to Facebook. And you remember that news cycle, that Facebook allowed too many, Russia influence, that kind of stuff. Now, I think that is wrong. There's a lot of actual misinformation in liberal circles about how much influence there is from foreign entities and others on Facebook. So I think they're misguided on some of that stuff. You could never persuade me that the small number of bots and groups that were of Russian origin was like the decisive factor in the 2016 election. I mean, you have to think that through for a minute. Like, this was targeted at a small number of people, but like cable news, regardless of what you're watching, is a 24-hour, 7 days a week propaganda commercial on behalf of Trump or against Trump, depending on who you're watching. Like, what we ascribe to the more recent technological innovations, all the bad stuff, which is nothing new, by the way. Like, throughout, blamed on TV, could be blamed on radio before that. I have examples in my book of like the New York Times being against the phonograph when it debuts. Like, every new innovation in the communication space always makes people go, oh no, what if now anyone can speak and use this and I can't control it anymore? That's what we're seeing now. But the progressives really do understand, many of them, that their ability to control the conversation has been altered by the presence of social media.
So at the heart of this controversy is a debate over whether Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act should be amended or repealed. So what is Section 230, and why do you argue against repealing it?
That is a great question. So Section 230 is this statute that's gotten more attention lately. It dates back to the 1990s. So the purpose of Section 230 is it provides immunity from liability risk. So you can't sue Facebook, you can't sue Twitter if there's speech on there that's defamatory. Now you can sue. So if I defame you on Facebook, you can sue me. You can't sue Facebook, which is different than, because if I defame you in the pages of Reason Magazine, you could sue me and you could sue Reason Magazine. But there's special protection for online web platforms. Now that protection is not just for web companies. Reason, in our, to the extent we're an online publication as well, our comments, if someone defames you in the comments at reason.com, you can sue that person, but not us. But so the company's speech is the company's, but other people's speech on an online platform is just theirs. So Section 230 was designed with that in mind. It's what let the internet kind of develop the way it is. Because imagine if you could sue Facebook for defamatory comments posted by people on Facebook. How it wouldn't even work. They would not be able to let anyone post at will. If they undertook liability risk for every single post, I mean, that would be the end of social media as we know it. You can't, at best, they would perhaps default to a system where only verified and trusted users could post at will, which does not seem to me like a recipe for conservatives to come out ahead. Like, what if Twitter changes it to only people with blue check marks can post at will? That's not going to benefit conservatives or libertarians or provocatives or contrarian people. So again, this seems like to the extent we're talking about getting rid of this protection of the companies, I understand why we're mad at them. I get that. I'm mad at them sometimes too. But we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot to get rid of these protections. These are the protections that make it easier for them to platform speech they don't like and disagree with. If you take away that protection, it's that kind of speech that they're going to clamp down on even harder. So it might feel satisfying to make it easier for people to sue Facebook and Twitter. Certainly trial lawyers would love it. It would be great for them. They'd be very happy about it. I don't see how this is a long-term winning strategy for the expansion of permissible speech on social media. Maybe there are tweaks you could make that would be inoffensive. There are certain areas of social media where I think perhaps small areas, laws could be improved or government could do more. But on these kinds of broad speech, viewpoint discrimination, those kinds of questions, we would risk doing ourselves much greater harm to undermine these liability protections.
What about some of the other arguments? Some have tried to push for breaking up entities like Google or Facebook on antitrust grounds. What are some of the merits or flaws of that approach? So
the issue here is that our current understanding of antitrust just does not cover these cases. So antitrust, the theory of antitrust is harm to the consumer. You can't really show, even if you accept, I think Google is closest to meeting the definition of a monopoly. I am actually more concerned about Google's behavior than Facebook and Twitter, certainly. But even so, can you demonstrate that Google or Facebook, through their enormous power, are they harming their users? Are they harming their customers? Not like it's a free service, right? It's not like the oil company that has all the oil and then it can raise the price of oil. Like, that's the situation antitrust law is designed to prevent. But if Facebook started charging us, we would just not use it. I mean, it's not it makes money off advertisers. It's selling a curated user experience. It's monopoly power is not wielded against consumers in the way that we consider traditional monopolies to do. So you would need to change what antitrust is. You'd need new laws to say that no, how these companies treat their competitors can count as, Facebook or the Amazon, the web hosting services, how they treat Parler versus Facebook or something. You have to say that's not covered under antitrust right now. So at best, we need some vast new kind of antitrust law to cover these problems. I'm not convinced that breaking up these companies would solve the issues conservatives care about, because if there's 10 Facebooks, all of a sudden, like Mark Zuckerberg is, warts and all, is the most committed to free speech and First Amendment principles of anyone who works at the company. So if you have 10 Facebooks, you probably have 9 companies that are even less friendly to conservative speech, and one still controlled by Mark Zuckerberg. So again, that doesn't also, and also the more bureaucrats you unleash on these companies, you can say your concern is silencing, censorship, all of that kind of stuff. The senators can say that at the hearing, but the people you unleash on these companies who work at the FTC, the FCC, will invariably be progressives that only care that these companies make too much money. So there's no, we can't, I very much do not believe we can sick the state on these companies in a way that it will actually end up speaking to our concerns.
So beyond bias, which we talked about, you mentioned some other concerns in your book that people have raised. One of them, and maybe this is a concern that is raised more by the left rather than the right, you can correct me, is this issue of radicalization, that people are going to go down a rabbit hole and they were just, watching a Disney trailer and then all of a sudden they're off on an Alex Jones website. You argue that actually the opposite is more likely to take place. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. This is a huge liberal concern. It kind of dovetails with the concern about misinformation being spread, all that. Of course, some of what the mainstream media and liberals and Democrats say is misinformation with respect to, for instance, COVID-19. I do not think is misinformation. You can be silenced for just kind of discussing the lab leak theory or wondering if mask mandates in schools are actually having this positive effect. There are people who would label that kind of thing misinformation. So that, concerns about viral misinformation spreading, that kind of stuff, I think are often unfounded. But the specific concern that, right, YouTube, young people are tumbling down this rabbit hole of videos where they encounter more extreme content, and then they turn into like little Nazis or something. It's happened a couple times. It doesn't seem to be the normal YouTube experience. Actually, these platforms often steer people who are flirting with truly violent, dangerous, bad stuff, ISIS stuff, Alex Jones, whatever. It tends to steer them back toward normal world. So that's it's not every time. There's certainly they've had times where the algorithm was not as good, and they've made changes. They've been responsive to what people have said, and they've made changes that are fine. Actually, right now, like Facebook is just deprioritizing news in general. It's hurting my business. All my friends at other publications were feeling this too. Like the traffic we're getting to our websites for news has been way turned down. But you know what? It's Facebook's company. If they decide, we think our users would rather just kind of interact with their, like their friends post pictures, things like that, and they're kind of sick of seeing so much news, we're going to turn down news a little bit. You know what? It's their company, and who am I to say that's the wrong call? So some of this is us trying to second guess what every people in a voluntary kind of association are deciding. Like, if you don't like the experience on these websites, you can leave them. It's not providing a vital service. There is some competition between the platforms, and I'm glad there's even more competition coming along with Rumble and some of the others. I absolutely think they should face competition along these kind of axes, and they do in fact. You can't convince me that they're in this unbeatable position. You could never overcome them because they came out of nowhere. Like, Facebook just outcompeted MySpace out of nowhere to become the dominant social media site in that space. Google's search engine just was better than what was in the market, and all of a sudden it's the one everyone wants to use. Like, it's the one everyone wants to use, which is why it's so weird to hear like government regulators say, no, Google is, even though I think there are some issues with Google, they'll say like, yes, Google is so evil and so bad and we have to do something about it. But it's the search engine that like 90% of people like and want. Like, if it wasn't the default search engine on their phones, they would say, why isn't it? I want it to be. So you end up in a weird place where you're saying, no, the government somehow knows better than what people themselves are freely choosing. And like, they like these platforms. People love Amazon. It's more popular than Congress. It's more popular than anything but the military. So some of these like big tech is the worst thing ever. Concerns you hear from both Democrats and Republicans, I don't think track with most people's normal experience, which is that they're like generally having a good time and feel like these products have improved their lives.
Well, if you are watching on Facebook or on Google or YouTube or Instagram, then shoot us a question and tell us, do you agree with Robby? Do you have questions for him? What has your experience been like? So Robby, you also in your book, you talk about the movie The Creepy Line, which was a 2018 documentary film, which actually received a lot of critical acclaim. It purported to show how social media sites manipulate users to spend more time and foster this kind of screen addiction in order to maximize revenues. But you have some issues with the film. What are those?
Yeah, there's a lot of, and this is also true of The Social Dilemma, which is the one that came out on Netflix. These concerns about, some of it is very, to me, reminiscent of moral panics about young people, and that like are familiar to me as someone who remembers the, oh no, like violent video games are making kids violent, that kind of thing, that all turned out to be like totally false. That social psychology research was completely debunked. So I certainly think some young people are too addicted to social media, and there can be negative outcomes. Just like anything can be unhealthy for you if you do it to excess. And yes, the social media sites are trying to keep you logged on. They want you to keep scrolling. They're competing for your attention. It's the most important finite resource there now is. I get all of that. I don't accept that they're capable of mind control, that we just can't help ourselves. We're so all addicted. We can't look away. We can't log off. I don't buy that. Those claims have been made about advertising in general for 50, 70 years. Remember, there's this old book, The Hidden Persuaders, about how the kind of Mad Men era, the 60s advertising, about how they had totally hacked the human brain and they just totally controlled you, and you would be buying products that without your even awareness, your subconscious would be reacting to the ads. Guess what? That was all nonsense. That was all made up. It's not true. Like, advertising is a very difficult and subtle field of psychology. So I suspect we'll find out that a lot of what we're talking about now is similar to that it's not nearly as scary or creepy as we think it to be. Also, to the extent that they're using, they're getting information about you. And I don't want them to share that information with the government. Like, I have privacy concerns, certainly. But to the extent they're just learning about you so they can show you advertisements that are more relevant to your interests, we have to be a little wary about saying that that's even a bad thing. Like, when I'm watching TV, I'm seeing advertisements and like I'm trying to fast forward them because it's like cereal or something. I don't eat cereal. This advertisement is irrelevant to me. But the advertisements I see on Facebook and elsewhere, well, they're often, not always, but they're often relevant to my interests because they know something about me that the TV doesn't. And it's better. It's an improved user experience. That's what their business model is. So it's a win. It's like, it's a win-win. I'm using this service for free. They're learning a little bit about me and sharing that information with advertisers so that I might buy something that I like. Again, where is the downside to this? Certainly, theoretically, we can understand if they're like compiling profiles of us and they intricately know our habits, and then that information ends up in government hands. Yes, absolutely. Government, bad. But that's the part of it I'm concerned about. And I think some of the other stuff is just kind of an attack on capitalism like itself. Like, this is the left finds that process of them trying to sell, advertisers trying to sell you things you might want as nefarious itself. And I don't feel that way because I'm a free market libertarian.
I have to say, I don't know what I would do without my Instagram ads. They supply my entire wardrobe.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
But speaking of an attack on capitalism and capitalism itself, in your conclusion, you use, of course, our favorite book, Atlas Shrugged, as an analogy in pointing out how some fans of Ayn Rand are behaving like Wesley Mouch rather than John Galt.
Yeah, absolutely. I was specifically calling out Ted Cruz. When I was talking about this, Ted Cruz, someone who has said, I'm quite sure he said that he draws inspiration from Atlas Shrugged, and he's a free market guy in Republican circles, and that he's inspired by Ayn Rand, and she's this hero of his. But now he and so many of his Republican colleagues are participating in summoning Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Sundar Pichai, and all the others before Congress, and then screaming at them that they don't like what those CEOs are doing with their products. And it occurs to me, like, does it occur to Ted that he is taking the role here of the government science person, screaming at a private entity that he doesn't like the decisions they're making? And I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there. And you see it every time this happens, these show trials for Zuckerberg and the others, where whatever you think of these tech companies. Whatever you think of these CEOs and you think they've made mistakes, you don't agree with all their decisions, that's fine. I don't agree with everything they've done either. But you have to feel some sympathy for them. They're being yelled at by Democrats and Republicans who don't have the faintest idea how these products work, who are frankly very old on average and like are so out of touch with the technology itself. They have no qualifications whatsoever to pontificate on any of these things. They expose themselves in an embarrassing fashion, humiliating for them that they don't know what they're talking about. And yet they say some people can somehow still conclude that, yes, the government really needs to get involved in this social media question. I don't understand it. I'm not there. I don't agree.
All right, let's grab some of these questions from Instagram. Marcus Spinazzi asks, Robby, what do you think of the alt tech platforms like BitChute, Odyssey? Are they gaining ground as market alternatives?
Yes. So I am by no means an expert in these alternative platforms. I, in fact, know very little about them. My colleagues at Reason are much savvier and smarter about those things. But to the extent I hear about them, and I've been learning more about how they work and what they are, yes, I am totally in favor of them. I think my colleague, Zach Weissmuller, who's brilliant, much smarter than I am at sort of crypto and alternative, some of this stuff. Yes, he thinks sort of massive decentralized internet via these platforms and these technologies is the future, and it'll be libertarian. It'll be beautiful, wonderful. So yes, I'm all for it. 2 thumbs up.
Okay, Cybo59 on YouTube asks, could you ask Robby point blank what he thinks of Ayn Rand?
I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I love her. So I have not read all of the canonical works. I've tried to get through Atlas Shrugged. Okay, I haven't gotten all the way through Atlas Shrugged, but I loved her interviews when I was much younger on the talk show guy. What is that guy's name? I'm sure you know who
Mike Wallace.
Yes. And I loved those interviews. No, Donahue. Yeah, I see someone posting a comment. Yeah, the Donahue interviews. I loved the Donahue interviews, and I drew a lot of inspiration. I call myself like a very, very light objectivist.
Oh, well, wonderful. Welcome. We'd love to have you, and we'll send you our pocket guide to Atlas Shrugged, and encourage you to maybe do the audio version on your next flight.
That's a great idea.
Okay, Scott Schiff asks, he says doing nothing seems to him like a sure way to keep letting them act unchecked. I think he's talking about sort of this bias. As cancel culture gains traction, is there a place for a broader pro-liberty, anti-woke coalition? Yeah,
look, I am all for that coalition. I write a lot in my normal kind of day job at Reason, and now I have a YouTube show on the Hill. I talk a lot about cancel culture and sort of the illiberal forces of wokeness. Often these conversations get frustrating because, yes, what can we actually do? And it's not satisfying. There's no satisfying answer because there just isn't a policy answer to how to overcome broad social and cultural changes. We just have to live our values, push back at when we see private actors behaving badly. You can just say you don't agree with this. I criticize the media constantly. That's almost my main kind of beat at this specific point is media criticism, trying to hold the media accountable, trying to push them to be better, calling them out when they get it wrong. But there is not a policy that we can't have, the government should not be shutting down companies that are, even though they are bad, right? We don't think they should be doing that. So for cancel culture specifically, maybe we're going to burn ourselves out and we're just going to get sick, or people in the media are going to get sick of, writing articles about, when you were in kindergarten and you said a nasty sexist thing or whatever, and now like you're going to have your Nobel Prize taken away. I mean, that kind of stuff. I am advocating against it, and I'm hoping we move on from it. I know I don't have a satisfying, no, here's what we do, here's how we'll beat it. I think people who are offering that, here's how we beat it, we're going to, get the government to have like a commission or something, like are diluted, or they're giving you false hope that this can be solved through policy. It cannot. Maybe the closest thing to a policy solution is to change our education. The education system, right, is massively under government control. We do not have to subsidize student loans for people to go to like elite liberal arts colleges where they gain values that are hostile to individual liberty, sure, we can change those policies. I'm all for it, but there isn't an immediate societal policy change we can make.
Is there actually an aspect of cancel culture? Because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if you've been tried to be canceled, but in a way, it's almost like a training program.
A badge of honor.
It's a badge of honor, but it's also a way for people that were kind of formerly on the left or liberals who are horrified at this, and it almost is seeming to kind of be an opportunity for people to reevaluate their assumptions, their cognitive commitments, because they're like, well, wow, if this is my team now, I'm not sure that this is okay with me.
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole kind of group of I'm not sure exactly what name to call them by. We've tried out different names, right? The intellectual dark web, the kind of
like Brett Weinstein. I mean, I don't know if he would have been such a kind of a strong voice for
right. There's a lot of people. Yeah, right. There's a lot of the kind of anti-cancel culture, concerned about woke crowd. A lot of people formerly of the left, sometimes of the very hard left, and many of them still to the left on certain issues, but very concerned about where the culture has gone in terms of being able to think and speak and share controversial ideas. So yes, it's nice to have friends, all over the political spectrum who feel that way.
So speaking of your bread and butter, your award that you got for journalism, and it has been kind of challenging, this media malpractice. In the intro, I mentioned two stories that you covered in which you challenged media malpractice. One of them being the Lincoln Memorial incident, in which students of Covington High School, most notably Nicholas Sandmann, were accused of racially harassing a Native American activist. So you saw what was kind of being circulated in the media and said, this doesn't quite look right. Tell us about the incident and what led you to uncover what really happened.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a rush to judgment that many in the media made based on this very short, as it turned out, misleading video clip of these kids supposedly harassing this Native American man on the steps of the Capitol. When I sat down to write about it, because a lot of people had already weighed in, I got a little lucky. It just so happened that I saw on social media, well, now there's longer footage of the video of the incident. So I said, well, I should probably watch the footage first. And it was quite long. And when you watch this hour plus of video footage from what happened before, it became so clear that the media had just gotten this like completely wrong, that there was so much else going on. There had been another group of people, the Black Hebrew Israelites, which is like a Black nationalist hate group that I've encountered on the streets of DC. They yell like anti everything, like anti-Jewish things, anti-women things, anti-gay things. They're just a group of crazy people. They were there harassing the boys, the Covington boys, for like an hour, before this. And what I saw from the teenagers was basically responsible behavior. They didn't fight. This group was looking for a fight, and the teenagers weren't giving them one. And it was into that dynamic that this Native American man and his entourage stumbled, and then he absolutely misrepresented the situation, both as it was happening and then to the media later, saying that the boys were harassing this group and he was, interceding so that the teens would stop harassing the Black Hebrew Israelites. Not at all what happened. And then the main focus of the media's ire, Nicholas Sandmann, this specific teenager who was accused of this angry, hate-filled stare. When you see it in the broader context, he is not doing anything. He didn't even get in the guy's way. The guy got in his way. He was not blocking his path. He was, in fact, he had tried to tell one of his friends not to engage the Native American man. So he was trying to de-escalate the escalation that everyone else was doing. So anyway, that's what the video showed to me. I wrote an article, and then I was glad to see that begin to set the record straight. It was, quickly retweeted, my article, by a lot of people in the mainstream media, who then did, many of them did say they got it wrong, which is, what else can you do? And then many of them got sued anyway. But still there's still some very liberal kind of more opinion publications still cling to the idea that, well, they were no angels, which is just, it's not true. They were victims.
So I want to get a little bit to your previous book, Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump. And you cover a bunch of things, but one of the things was this incident or non-incident that happened at the University of Virginia, and you won your California Journalism Award for writing about this defamatory Rolling Stone article about this hoax incident of sexual assault. For those not familiar with the story, what was it about, and how did you go about getting to the truth?
Yeah, this was a similar case much earlier in my career. This one was this big story in Rolling Stone magazine about a gang sexual assault at the University of Virginia. And it was a really horrific story. This woman was supposedly lured upstairs at a fraternity party and then, viciously assaulted by a group of men. And it was made to sound like it was almost ritualistic, like it was some initiation rite for them. So I read it, and I started thinking that in all my career of covering crimes on campus, particularly sexual misconduct, I'd never encountered one where the victim had not been incapacitated via alcohol or drugs. And then there were also multiple perpetrators who had pre-planned it. Because the implication of this one was that this was planned. So usually when sexual misconduct happens on college campuses, it is unplanned. There's drinking and drugs, and then lines get crossed. And sometimes they get crossed very badly. Don't get me wrong. But I'd never ever seen one like this is like from like a Law and Order episode, like Law and Order is not real. This stuff doesn't happen, where they would have planned it. And then like, how would they have gotten away? Because usually the victims don't quite recall what happened. So they're reluctant they don't know what to report. But like she had said, she was fully lucid for it. So these were a bunch of red flags. Like this has never happened before. And as it turned out, it didn't happen in this case. It fell apart after I challenged it very quickly. So I had like one day where I got totally attacked by everyone in the media saying I was like saying rape didn't exist or something. And then it turned out that because she had claimed, according to her story, like she knew who this guy was, she was on a date with this guy. Well, the author of the story had not verified that this guy existed prior to publishing it, which is a huge red flag.
Crazy.
Like if you're not going to use someone's name in a story, that's one thing, but you have to say, okay, but what is his name actually? So I can like look him up on Facebook to make sure he exists. Because that would have, the whole thing would have fallen apart. He was not a real person. He doesn't exist. And then, so it started to get very interesting in terms of how crazy, for lack of a better word, she was. Like she had gotten used a messaging service to send fake text messages to her friends, pretending she was this guy she was pretending to be dating to make a friend jealous. Like her deception was very elaborate, but would have easily been uncovered by just the bare minimum of the fact-checking journalism process. If any of her if the journalist had tried to talk to any of this woman's friends, Jackie was the name of the supposed victim, they would have said, no, she's nuts. She's nuts. We figured out she's catfishing us. So in that case, so there was also, defamation suits against Rolling Stone, libel against Rolling Stone, against her, and those suits were successful. Honestly, between the two, this was the clearer case of defamation than in the Covington case, because they did not do in the Rolling Stone case what would have been normally expected of a journal. The normal journalistic process would have revealed that this was a fraud. Whereas in the Covington case, to some extent, the Native American man gave them false information. They could have worked harder. They should have characterized things differently. It was still wrong, but it was kind of in a spectrum of, well, it was wrong, but was it intentional? Was it recklessly wrong? Do you know what I mean? It was a little bit more unclear. They were more actively misled by the being misled part of it was more understandable than in the Rolling Stone case, where it's like, okay, but you shouldn't have fallen for this because you're obligated to do X, Y, and Z before you publish a story, and you didn't.
So Aaron Singer on Instagram says, speaking of media malpractice, he wonders if you have read Ashley Rinsberg's take on the New York Times. And Aaron, you can also check out the interview I did with Ashley Rinsberg last week.
Is this referring to the Sarah Palin case?
No, this is The Gray Lady Winked. This is a author out of Israel who has written about sort of malpractice at the New York Times, going back to its denial of the Ukrainian famine, its kind of downplaying of the Holocaust. So
I haven't encountered this specifically, but I broadly agree. In fact, in my book, my new book, I've said that like the villain of the book is the New York Times. I am a frequent critic. I think how they've handled actually tech issues has just been abhorrent, like throughout history. I can't tell. You can find so many examples of the New York Times condemning the phonograph, radio, TV, like everything that competes with the New York Times. Like bicycles, yes, bicycles. I know it's a moral panic in service of keeping their audience. They don't want you to think or read or do anything without their permission. I mentioned Sarah Palin because they're currently embroiled. This is the defamation.
What do you think of that?
It's very interesting. I don't know that she's going to win. She's a very hard bar to make, but there's no question, and even the New York Times concedes that their editorial about her was horrifically wrong. So they had that editorial after the baseball shooting in DC, the Steve Scalise shooting. So they had an editorial condemning political violence, but they said that, as an example of political violence on the other side, a conservative targeting a Democrat, they said Gabby Giffords, the Arizona congresswoman who was shot by this crazy guy, Jared Lee Loughner, and they referenced that the map, the Tea Party map where crosshairs were put over her district. But okay, we all know now, and I thought the New York Times knew this, but apparently the editorial page editor didn't. We all know that Jared Lee Loughner, the shooter, was not a conservative, and he had not seen that map, and he did not shoot Giffords for any reason that we can tell that is like connected to political conservatism or libertarianism or something. He was a crazy person. So it is not an example at all of like even like loose moral incitement or something. So it was a total false equivalency. Now they admit that they got it wrong. He has admitted that. So the case hinges on whether, the tough bar to meet because she's a public figure. So it's not just wrong. Like you can't sue someone every time they say something about you that's wrong. There has to be actual malice or like reckless disregard. So it has to be either they knew it was wrong and said it anyway, which honestly, I don't think they did. I think they did not know. They should have known this. So then the question is, well, how much should they have known this? How reckless was it? Was it, how much did their process of constructing this editorial break down? And I don't know. I think a reasonable person could weigh in. A reasonable jury could weigh in either way. It was reprehensible conduct regardless, but whether it crosses the line into libel, I'm not sure.
Well, I want to also get back to your previous book, Panic Attack. I don't have the actual physical copy, but
well, thank you.
I've got my Audible here. And at the Atlas Society, we're a philosophy organization, so we're particularly interested in things like postmodernism versus objectivity and truth versus subjectivity. And you go into that a little bit in that book, and you talk about intersectionality, critical race theory, some of the changes that have been happening over really the past 50 years on campus. And one of the things that really struck me was you observed this penchant among young activists to speak of the impact of discrimination on like brown and Black bodies rather than individuals. What's with that particular use of language?
Yeah, so I'm an amateur observer of philosophical trends. Certainly, I have no expertise, but I talked to a lot of student activists for the book. I researched, what has changed on campus, and I was really struck by that language, by a lot of the language that imputes almost psychic harm to words. Nice. There is an attack on objectivity going on, and you know, not even an attack on like objective, like an attack on the idea that there is truth,
Right.
an idea that is not that is should be popular across the political spectrum, right? I'm not saying like just an attack on our narrow beliefs, but an attack on a pretty foundational idea to like the Enlightenment and to the scientific method, to rational discourse, which is that, you know, first of all, they'll say that, well, only you are the expert in your own oppression. So unless you have been victimized by, you know, this cascading hierarchy of various isms, you are incapable of weighing in on them. But then also they will say it is not their job to educate you about these issues. So you are both ignorant and must remain ignorant is kind of the implications of this. And then what you'll see in activist circles on the left, since authority stems from having been the victim been the theoretical victim of more and more axes of oppression, they will compete to have the most. So, you know, it's not enough to just be a person of color. You could be a transgender person of color, or a gay transgender person of color, or one who has experienced, sizeism or ageism or any other thing. But what I realized is this pushes people toward self-identifying with mental illness as having mental illness, because many of these things you can't fake, but you can chalk your, we've all had a certain amount of trauma. The last 2 years have been horrible. We've all have some level of trauma. There's a lot of rounding up one's kind of just regular commonplace struggles to post-traumatic stress disorder or like a kind of mental disability. And that will be the first thing people in activist left circles tell you. Well, I have this, I'm bipolar, or I'm suffering from PTSD, or this is bad. A political philosophy that causes people to want to associate themselves, identify themselves as mentally disabled or struggling or emotionally traumatized is unhealthy on its face. And that has been where it has gone. And I am against it. That is not to say that mental illness is not real. It's certainly real. I am more acutely aware of how social conditions can create trauma and people need help. So none of that. But we've almost destigmatized it so much that like people are now seeing it as a positive and it's bad. It's very bad. We should not encourage people to want to be traumatized.
Agreed. I mean, I think that's also something with the way that we treat our veterans and just the kind of constant focus because of course, American intervention is so horrible that anybody who is serving in the military is going to come back and they're going to be broken. And people come back from service with a mix of feelings, some traumatic feelings and also some pride and a sense of efficacy. But I also thought it was that point that you made about the bodies was interesting, because it's, if you're going to kind of blur the line between words that are unpleasant and that are mean or that are offensive and force, and so that it's not just that you're saying something to me as a person, you're saying something to me as a body. It implies that there is some kind of force.
Right. They're trying to round up unpleasant emotional experiences, the verbal experiences, as a kind of physical violence, which is where that body's language, I think, comes from. And it's very harmful, because we should not equalize unpleasant words being the same as physical violence. Actually, historically, those things were equal. A lot of people don't realize that. For most of human history, insulting someone was the same thing as taking a swing at them. It would provoke retribution. If you insulted the king, you could lose your head. Right. If you insult your neighbors, you could have a blood feud with them. If you insult the king, you could be executed. If you insult the religious authorities, you could be burned at the stake. Most of human history is people being killed for saying the wrong thing. Words were violence. Only in like the last 200 years, post-Enlightenment, I think the Enlightenment was a good thing, we have changed it so that no, you can say whatever you say. Saying something is not punishable by formal or informal sanction the way physical violences. There's a difference between the two things. It's good. It allows for a more healthy society that you don't have to kill someone every time you don't like what they say. This is much better. There's a better way of doing things. Let's not erode that very hard fought distinction.
So we're coming up towards the top of the hour here. Robby, thank you so much for making the time. You mentioned it's been a rough couple of years. Just tell us where you are, what you're working on, if you're feeling more or less optimistic than you were 2 years ago, and yeah, what's your next project?
Sure. Well, I'm now doing a YouTube video. I'm hosting a YouTube show. In addition, I'm still at Reason. I'm still, producing as much.
Are you at Reason now?
I'm there. I'm in our offices.
I see the orange, the couch.
Yep. I'm in our offices in DC, but I now have a YouTube show for The Hill, the publication. It's called Rising. The show's been on for a while, for like years, but its hosts departed. They left to start off on their own. So I'm the kind of replacement host for the right of center perspective, even though I'm not a Republican. I'm a libertarian. And we have fun kind of discussions. The other two hosts are kind of on the left in various ways, although we're all very against COVID restrictions at this point. I'm radically against them. The pandemic has been a hard time. I want it, behind us. I'm very, very against the mandates, which in DC are just, we still have our mask mandate. I feel like it will be the last holdout. I know LA still has it too, but it's unbelievable. And also the people in DC love following rules. And I've been reported so many times for not wearing masks when I'm supposed to. I'm just so sick of it. I think, broadly speaking, the libertarian conservative movement needs to, be very clear that this is not okay. This is not acceptable. You cannot force individuals to do these things, under the nebulous public health guidance. So I would be. They slow walked it, right? It didn't all come at once. I should have been more angry from the start. If I had known it was going to be 2 years later, they were going to still be saying, well, there are some cases, so masks still have to be worn, that our 2-year-olds, would have them wrapped around their faces in schools for years. I would have been even, I guess I would have been even angrier, but we just have to be against it. We have to be against it.
I've been angry from the start, and I am a lot angrier. So maybe it's good that you took a little bit more time to warm up to your righteous ire, because
ire it is.
It's pretty upsetting. Well, let's put that link to his show in the chat. And Robby, thank you so very much. We're going to send you a couple of graphic novels of Ayn Rand's works that might make it more fun, by our wonderful Dan Parsons, award-winning Marvel Comics illustrator. So we'd love to have you give them a look, and look forward to seeing you hopefully in Nashville.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you as well.
All right. Thanks so much.